Sarah Martinez had never seen mountains like these before. The Rocky Mountains stretched endlessly beyond Fort Carson, their peaks still dusted with early autumn snow despite the warm September air. She clutched her duffel bag tighter as the military transport bus rumbled through the main gates, past guards who barely glanced at the new recruits. 3 weeks ago, Sarah had been working the family farm in Hays, Kansas, waking up at 5 every morning to milk cows and tend to crops that seemed to grow smaller each year. The farm had been in her family for 4 generations, but after her father's death from a heart attack the previous spring, everything had started falling apart. The bank notices piled up on the kitchen counter while her mother worked double shifts at the local diner just to keep the lights on. Sarah's father, Miguel Martinez, had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before returning home to marry her mother and take over the family farm. He rarely spoke about his military service, but Sarah remembered the way his eyes would light up when he talked about the discipline, the brotherhood, and the sense of purpose he had found in the army. On quiet evenings, he would tell her stories about the friends he had made and the skills he had learned that helped him long after he came home. The military teaches you more than just how to follow orders, he would say, his weathered hands gesturing as he spoke. It teaches you how to think under pressure, how to solve problems when everything is going wrong, and how to find strength you never knew you had. After the funeral, when the bills kept coming and the farm equipment started breaking down faster than they could afford to fix it, Sarah remembered those words. She also remembered the life insurance policy that would only pay out if she could prove financial hardship and demonstrate a plan for supporting her mother long-term. The military offered both a steady income and educational benefits that could eventually lead to a better life for both of them. But there was another reason Sarah had enlisted, one she had never told her mother or anyone else. In her father's old military trunk, she had found a letter he had written to her but never sent. In it, he described a dream he had of seeing his daughter succeed in ways he never could, of watching her break barriers and prove that the Martinez family was made of stronger stuff than anyone realized. "You have something special in you, Mija," the letter read. "I see it when you fix the tractor engine that 3 mechanics couldn't figure out. I see it when you outshoot every hunter in the county at the annual competition. You have gifts that this small town can't contain. Promise me that if something happens to me, you won't let fear keep you from finding out just how extraordinary you really are." Now, as the bus pulled up to the processing center at Fort Carson, Sarah felt the weight of that promise pressing down on her shoulders. Around her, the other new recruits chattered nervously or stared out the windows in silence. Most of them looked like they had stepped out of military recruitment posters, tall, broad-shouldered young men with confident postures and easy smiles. A few other women sat scattered throughout the bus, but even they seemed more prepared than Sarah felt. Sarah had always been small for her age, barely 5 feet 3 inches tall and slight of build despite years of farm work. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her clothes, a plain t-shirt and jeans that her mother had bought from the discount rack at Walmart, marked her as someone who had never had much money to spend on appearances. She looked exactly like what she was, a poor farm girl who was way out of her depth. The bus doors hissed open, and a drill sergeant stepped aboard. Sergeant First Class Richard Thompson was exactly what Sarah had expected from watching military movies, tall, imposing, with a voice that could probably be heard from 3 counties away. His uniform was pressed to perfection, and his eyes swept over the new recruits like a hawk evaluating prey. "Welcome to Fort Carson, ladies and gentlemen," Thompson barked. "In exactly 30 seconds, you will exit this bus in an orderly fashion and form up in the designated area. You will move quickly, you will move quietly, and you will not embarrass yourselves on your first day at my base. Is that understood?" A chorus of "yes, Sergeant," filled the bus, though Sarah noticed that her own voice sounded thin and uncertain compared to the confident responses around her. As the recruits filed off the bus, Sarah caught snippets of conversation that made her stomach tighten with anxiety. Several of the men were discussing their experience with firearms, comparing stories about hunting trips and competitive shooting. One woman mentioned that her father had been a Marine and had been training her for this moment since she was 12 years old. Sarah had learned to shoot on the farm, and she was good at it, better than good, actually. Her father had taught her to hunt rabbits and coyotes that threatened their crops, and she had never missed a shot that mattered. But that was different from military training. That was just a farm girl shooting at targets that moved predictably through familiar terrain. The processing area was a chaos of organized confusion. Drill sergeants shouted instructions while clerks behind folding tables checked names off lists and handed out paperwork. New recruits stood in lines that seemed to form and dissolve randomly, clutching papers and trying to figure out where they were supposed to be next. Sarah found herself in line behind a young man who looked like he had been born in military fatigues. His posture was perfect, his haircut regulation, and, when he spoke to the clerk, his voice carried the crisp confidence of someone who had been preparing for this moment his entire life. "David Chen," he said when asked for his name. "I completed JROTC at my high school and attended a military preparatory academy for 2 years. I'm requesting assignment to the infantry with the eventual goal of qualifying for special forces." The clerk barely looked up as she stamped his papers and directed him to the next station. Sarah felt her palms begin to sweat as she stepped forward. "Name?" the clerk asked without looking up. "Sarah Martinez," she replied, hating how quiet her voice sounded. "Previous military experience?" "None." "Educational background?" "High school diploma." "Some community college courses in agricultural science." For the first time, the clerk looked up, taking in Sarah's slight frame and nervous demeanor. Her expression was neutral, but Sarah caught a flicker of something that might have been pity or doubt. "Any specific career field requests?" Sarah hesitated. She had spent weeks researching different military occupations, trying to find something that would make use of her skills while providing good training for civilian careers. But, standing here now, surrounded by people who seemed so much more prepared and confident, she felt foolish for thinking she could handle anything challenging. "I was hoping for something in logistics or maybe communications," she said finally. The clerk made a note on her paperwork and handed her a packet of forms. "Report to Building C for medical processing, then, Building F for aptitude testing. Your drill sergeant will provide further instructions after that." As Sarah walked away from the table, she overheard the clerk talking to her colleague. "Another farm kid who thinks the military is going to solve all her problems," the woman said with a slight laugh. "Give her 2 weeks before she's crying to go home." The comment stung, but it also lit a small fire in Sarah's chest. She had heard variations of that same dismissive tone her entire life, from teachers who assumed that farm kids weren't college material, from classmates who thought she was too poor and too quiet to amount to anything, from bank officers who spoke to her mother like she was stupid for trying to keep the family farm running. Sarah had learned long ago that people's expectations could either crush you or fuel you, depending on how you chose to respond to them. As she walked toward the medical processing building, she made a decision that would shape everything that happened next. She was going to prove them wrong, not just about her, but about every assumption they had ever made about what someone like her could accomplish. The medical processing was routine: height and weight measurements, vision and hearing tests, a review of her medical history. The doctor who examined her was professional but distant, making notes about her small frame and asking questions about any previous injuries. Sarah mentioned that she had broken her wrist falling off a horse when she was 14, but that it had healed completely and never caused her any problems. The aptitude testing was more challenging. Sarah sat in a room with 40 other recruits, taking computerized tests that evaluated everything from mechanical reasoning to spatial awareness to mathematical skills. Some of the questions were straightforward, but others required types of thinking that Sarah had never been exposed to in her rural high school. When the testing was complete, recruits were called up one by one to meet with career counselors who would help match them with appropriate military occupational specialties. Sarah watched as David Chen emerged from his counseling session with a satisfied smile and paperwork that she caught a glimpse of, something about infantry and combat roles. When her name was called, Sarah found herself sitting across from Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Rodriguez reviewed Sarah's test results with raised eyebrows. "These are interesting scores, Martinez," she said. "Your mechanical reasoning is in the 95th percentile, and your spatial awareness scores are off the charts. You also scored very high on problem solving under pressure. Have you ever considered a more technical field?" Sarah blinked in surprise. "I thought I would be better suited for something like logistics or administration." "Why would you think that?" "I don't know. I guess I figured those would be easier for someone like me." Rodriguez leaned back in her chair and studied Sarah carefully. "Someone like you? You mean someone who can diagnose engine problems that stump trained mechanics? Someone who can calculate wind speed and distance to make precision shots in challenging conditions? Someone who scores in the top 5% on spatial reasoning tests?" Sarah felt her cheeks flush. She hadn't mentioned the shooting or the mechanical work on her application, and she was surprised that Rodriguez seemed to know about them. "I did some research on your background," Rodriguez explained, as if reading her thoughts. Your high school principal wrote a very interesting letter of recommendation. He mentioned that you had essentially been running the maintenance operations for your family's farm since you were 16, and that several local businesses had started hiring you to fix equipment that their regular repair services couldn't handle. That was just farm stuff, Sarah said, downplaying her accomplishments out of habit. Farm stuff, Rodriguez repeated with a slight smile. Do you know what military equipment is, at its core? Machines that need to work reliably under the worst possible conditions, operated by people who may not have extensive technical training. Do you know what successful military operations depend on? People who can think clearly under pressure and adapt quickly when things don't go according to plan. She pulled out a different set of career field descriptions and spread them across the desk. I want you to look at these options. Combat engineer, military intelligence, even infantry. Don't choose based on what you think you should do. Choose based on what you're actually capable of. Sarah studied the papers, her mind racing. Everything she had planned, every safe and reasonable choice she had made, suddenly seemed small and limiting. She thought about her father's letter, about his dream of seeing her discover how extraordinary she could be. What would you recommend? She asked. Rodriguez smiled. Honestly? Infantry. I know it sounds crazy for someone your size, but hear me out. Infantry training will push you harder than anything else, but it will also give you skills and confidence that will serve you for the rest of your life. And, based on these test scores, I think you might surprise everyone, including yourself. Sarah felt her heart begin to race. Infantry meant combat training, weapon systems, physical challenges that would test every limit she had. It was exactly the opposite of the safe, reasonable choice she had planned to make. It was also exactly what her father would have wanted her to consider. Okay, she said, her voice stronger than it had been all day. Infantry. Rodriguez nodded approvingly and began filling out the paperwork. Fair warning, Martinez. You're going to face people who think you don't belong there. Some of them will be fellow recruits, some will be trainers, and some will be people who are supposed to support you. The question is, are you going to let their opinions define what you're capable of, or are you going to show them what they're wrong about? As Sarah signed the papers that would change the entire course of her military service, she thought about the clerk who had dismissed her as just another farm kid, about the recruits on the bus who had seemed so much more prepared, about everyone back home who thought the Martinez family was destined for nothing but struggle and failure. She was about to prove them all wrong, though she had no idea just how spectacular that proof would be, or how it would all come down to a single moment with a rifle that was designed to fail. The alarm clock exploded to life at 4:30 in the morning, though Sarah had been awake for the past hour, staring at the ceiling and listening to the steady breathing of her bunkmates. 3 weeks into basic training at Fort Carson, she still wasn't used to sleeping in a room with 30 other people, and she definitely wasn't used to the constant knot of anxiety that had taken up permanent residence in her stomach. Across the barracks, she could hear the other recruits beginning to stir. Some moved with the practiced efficiency of people who had found their rhythm, while others groaned and stumbled around like they were still fighting the reality of military life. Sarah had learned to wake up early and lie still for a few minutes, using the quiet time to mentally prepare herself for another day of proving that she belonged here. The first 2 weeks had been a blur of physical training, classroom instruction, and endless drills designed to break down civilian habits and rebuild them into military discipline. Sarah had struggled with some aspects, the constant yelling still made her flinch, and she had to work twice as hard as the bigger recruits to meet the physical fitness standards, but she had also discovered strengths she never knew she possessed. During the obstacle course training, her small size became an advantage when navigating tight spaces or climbing over barriers. In the classroom sessions on military tactics and equipment, her mechanical aptitude helped her understand complex systems faster than most of her peers. And, when they began basic firearms instruction, Sarah's shooting scores were consistently among the highest in her training company. But none of that seemed to matter to Drill Sergeant Thompson, who had apparently decided that Sarah was his personal project for demonstrating the consequences of military standards being lowered to accommodate people who didn't belong. Martinez. Thompson's voice cut across the barracks like a whip crack. You're moving like my grandmother, and she's been dead for 10 years. Pick up the pace. Sarah grabbed her gear and joined the controlled chaos of 30 recruits trying to get dressed, make their bunks, and prepare for morning formation in less than 15 minutes. She had learned to lay out her uniform the night before and to make her bunk so tight that a quarter would bounce off it, but Thompson always managed to find something wrong with her preparation. As the recruits filed out for morning physical training, Sarah found herself running alongside David Chen, who had become something of an unofficial leader among their group. Despite his initially intimidating confidence, David had turned out to be genuinely helpful, often sharing tips and encouragement with recruits who were struggling. "Don't let Thompson get in your head," David said quietly as they jogged toward the training area. "He's hardest on the people he thinks have the most potential." Sarah shot him a skeptical look. "Pretty sure he just thinks I'm a waste of space." "Trust me on this one," David replied. "I've been watching how he interacts with everyone. The people he ignores are the ones he's already written off. The ones he pushes are the ones he thinks might actually make it." Sarah wanted to believe that, but it was hard to maintain optimism when every day felt like a test she was barely passing. The physical training was brutal, endless push-ups, sit-ups, and runs that left her gasping while other recruits seemed barely winded. She had gotten stronger over the past 3 weeks, but her small frame meant she had to work harder than anyone else just to meet the minimum standards. The morning PT session was particularly challenging. Thompson had decided to focus on combat-ready fitness exercises, which meant carrying heavy packs over long distances, low-crawling through mud under simulated gunfire, and completing timed obstacle courses while wearing full gear. Sarah struggled through the pack march, her shoulders aching under the 60-pound load that represented nearly half her body weight. Several times, she felt herself falling behind the main group, but each time she found an extra reserve of determination and pushed herself to catch up. During the low-crawl exercise, her size became an advantage. While the larger recruits struggled to keep their bodies flat against the ground, Sarah could move quickly and efficiently through the course. She finished third overall, earning a grudging nod of approval from Thompson. But it was during the obstacle course that Sarah truly began to understand what David had meant about Thompson's teaching methods. The course consisted of 12 different challenges designed to test agility, strength, and problem-solving under pressure. Recruits had to climb over walls, navigate through mazes of barbed wire, cross water obstacles, and complete a simulated building clearing exercise at the end. Sarah had run this course dozens of times over the past 3 weeks, and her times had steadily improved as she figured out techniques that worked for her smaller frame. Today, however, Thompson had added a new wrinkle: each recruit was carrying a simulated wounded soldier through the entire course. The wounded soldier was actually a weighted dummy that approximated the size and weight of an average infantry soldier. For most of the recruits, it was a significant challenge but a manageable one. For Sarah, who weighed barely 125 pounds herself, it seemed almost impossible. "The enemy doesn't care how big you are, Martinez," Thompson announced as she struggled to lift the dummy onto her shoulders. "In combat, you might need to carry a wounded teammate who's twice your size. Figure it out." Sarah tried several different carrying positions, each one more awkward and exhausting than the last. The dummy kept slipping from her grasp, and she could feel her face burning with embarrassment as other recruits completed the course while she was still struggling with the first obstacle. Finally, something clicked in her mind. Instead of trying to carry the dummy the way the bigger recruits did, she needed to find a method that worked with her strengths instead of against her limitations. She repositioned the dummy so that its weight was distributed differently, creating a more stable center of gravity that she could manage with her smaller frame. The technique worked. Sarah began moving through the course steadily, not as fast as the strongest recruits but faster than she had any right to be given the size difference. Her farming background had taught her that there was always more than one way to solve a problem, and that sometimes the best solution was the one that nobody else had thought to try. She was halfway through the course when she realized that Thompson was running alongside her, offering occasional guidance and encouragement instead of his usual criticism. "Good adaptation, Martinez," he said as she navigated a particularly tricky water crossing. "That's the kind of thinking that saves lives in the field." Sarah nearly stumbled in surprise. It was the first genuinely positive feedback Thompson had given her since training began. She finished the course exhausted but proud, posting a time that was respectable given the circumstances. More importantly, she had figured out something about herself and about the way her mind worked under pressure. That afternoon's training session was focused on basic marksmanship, which had quickly become Sarah's favorite part of military training. The shooting range was the one place where her farm background translated directly into military skills, and it was the one area where she consistently outperformed almost everyone in her training company. The recruits were working with standard-issue M16 rifles, learning proper stance, breathing techniques, and trigger control. For most of them, these were completely new skills that required careful instruction and lots of practice. For Sarah, it was like returning to a familiar language she had spoken since childhood. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 8 years old, starting with a .22 caliber rifle that was almost as long as she was tall. Over the years, she had progressed to larger calibers and longer distances, hunting everything from rabbits to deer on their family farm. She had learned to account for wind speed and direction, to compensate for elevation changes, and to make quick, accurate shots at moving targets. But military marksmanship was different from hunting. The standards were higher, the pressure was greater, and the implications of success or failure were more serious. Sarah found that she loved the challenge. Today's exercise involved shooting at targets placed at various distances, with each recruit required to demonstrate proficiency at ranges from 50 to 300 meters. The scoring system was precise and unforgiving, each shot was carefully measured and recorded, with strict time limits that added pressure to an already challenging task. Sarah approached the firing line with the confidence that came from years of experience. She settled into her shooting position, adjusted her sight picture, and began the methodical process of engaging targets at increasing distances. Her first few shots were perfect center hits, earning maximum points and drawing attention from the range instructors. As the distances increased and the targets became more challenging, Sarah continued to deliver consistent accuracy that was remarkable even by military standards. By the time she completed the exercise, a small crowd had gathered behind the firing line to watch. Her final score was the highest anyone in the company had achieved, surpassing even recruits who had claimed years of competitive shooting experience. Sergeant First Class Williams, the primary marksmanship instructor, reviewed her target sheets with obvious appreciation. Williams was a career soldier who had served multiple combat deployments and had seen every level of shooting ability imaginable. "Outstanding work, Martinez," Williams said, loud enough for the other recruits to hear. "This is textbook marksmanship. Where did you learn to shoot like this?" "My father taught me on our farm in Kansas, Sergeant," Sarah replied, still not quite comfortable with the attention. "Well, your father did an excellent job. Have you ever considered trying out for the base shooting team?" Sarah felt her eyes widen in surprise. The base shooting team was an elite group that competed in inter-service competitions and represented Fort Carson at the highest levels of military marksmanship. She had never imagined that someone like her would be considered for something so prestigious. "I don't know if I'm ready for that level of competition, Sergeant," she said honestly. "That's not for you to decide," Williams replied with a smile. "That's what tryouts are for. I'm going to recommend you for evaluation when you complete basic training." As the other recruits prepared for their turn at the firing line, Sarah felt a new sense of possibility beginning to take shape. For the first time since arriving at Fort Carson, she was being recognized not just as someone who was trying hard to fit in, but as someone who actually excelled at something important. That evening, back in the barracks, Sarah found herself surrounded by fellow recruits who wanted to know about her shooting background. Some were genuinely interested in learning from her experience, while others seemed suspicious or resentful of the attention she had received. "Must be nice to have an advantage the rest of us don't," commented Jake Morrison, a recruit from suburban Denver who had struggled with every aspect of marksmanship training. "Some of us didn't grow up playing with guns." The comment stung, partly because Sarah could hear the implication that her success was somehow unfair or unearned. She had encountered this attitude before, the assumption that because she came from a rural background, she had somehow been given opportunities that others lacked. "It wasn't playing," she replied quietly. "It was work. Learning to hunt meant being able to put food on our table when money was tight. Learning to shoot accurately meant protecting our livestock from predators that could destroy our livelihood." David Chen, who had been cleaning his rifle nearby, looked up at Morrison with disapproval. "That's exactly the kind of attitude that makes some people fail at things they could succeed at. Instead of complaining about other people's advantages, maybe you should focus on developing your own skills." Morrison's face reddened, but he didn't respond directly. Instead, he turned back to his equipment and continued cleaning his rifle with obvious frustration. Sarah appreciated David's support, but she also understood Morrison's perspective. She had felt the same way during physical training exercises, watching recruits who seemed naturally gifted at tasks that challenged her. The difference was that she had chosen to use that feeling as motivation rather than resentment. Later that night, as the barracks settled into the quiet rhythm of soldiers trying to get enough sleep before another early morning, Sarah lay awake thinking about the day's events. The obstacle course had shown her that she could find creative solutions to seemingly impossible problems. The marksmanship exercise had demonstrated that she possessed skills that were genuinely valuable in a military context. But, more than that, she was beginning to understand that her background, the very thing that had made her feel out of place when she first arrived, was actually a source of strength. Growing up on a farm had taught her to work harder than she thought was possible, to find solutions when conventional approaches failed, and to maintain her composure under pressure. She thought about her father's letter, about his dream of seeing her discover how extraordinary she could be. 3 weeks ago, that had seemed like an impossible standard to meet. Now, it was beginning to feel like a challenge she might actually be capable of rising to meet. What Sarah didn't know, as she finally drifted off to sleep, was that her real test was still coming. In just over a week, she would face a situation that would require every skill she had developed and every lesson she had learned. And it would all come down to her ability to succeed with a rifle that someone had deliberately sabotaged, in front of an audience that expected her to fail. The next morning brought news that would set the stage for everything that followed. Drill Sergeant Thompson announced that their training company would be participating in a special evaluation exercise, a comprehensive test of everything they had learned during basic training, with representatives from various advanced training programs observing to identify candidates for specialized roles. "This is your opportunity to show what you're made of," Thompson announced to the assembled recruits. "Some of you will exceed expectations and earn opportunities you never imagined. Others will demonstrate that basic infantry is exactly where you belong. Which category you fall into is entirely up to you." As Sarah listened to the details of the upcoming evaluation, she felt a familiar mixture of anxiety and determination settling in her chest. This was exactly the kind of high-stakes situation that had always brought out either her best or her worst, with no middle ground between success and failure. She thought about Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's words from her career counseling session: "Are you going to let their opinions define what you're capable of, or are you going to show them what they're wrong about?" Sarah was about to find out which person she really was, though she had no idea that someone was already working behind the scenes to ensure that she would fail in the most public and humiliating way possible. The week leading up to the evaluation exercise passed in a blur of intensified training and barely controlled anxiety. Every aspect of their military education was being tested and refined as the drill sergeants pushed the recruits harder than ever before. Sarah found herself caught between the growing confidence she felt in her shooting abilities and the persistent doubt that whispered she was still just a farm girl pretending to be a soldier. The evaluation would take place over 2 days and would test everything from physical fitness and tactical knowledge to leadership potential and performance under stress. Representatives from various Army schools would be present, Special Forces, Rangers, military intelligence, and several technical specialties that recruited directly from basic training graduates who showed exceptional potential. What made the evaluation particularly significant was that it would determine not just advanced training assignments, but also who would be selected for the prestigious leadership development programs that could shape entire military careers. For someone like Sarah, who had enlisted primarily for practical reasons, the stakes had suddenly become much higher than she had ever imagined. During the preparation sessions, Drill Sergeant Thompson seemed to take particular interest in ensuring that Sarah was ready for the challenges ahead. His approach remained demanding and occasionally harsh, but she had begun to recognize the difference between destructive criticism and the kind of pressure designed to prepare someone for success. "The evaluation isn't just about individual performance," Thompson explained during one of their training sessions. "It's about how you perform when everything is going wrong, when your equipment fails, when your teammates are struggling, and when the people watching are looking for any excuse to write you off." He paused and looked directly at Sarah. "Some of you will face additional challenges that have nothing to do with your actual abilities. The question is whether you'll let those challenges defeat you or whether you'll use them to demonstrate exactly what you're capable of achieving." Sarah wasn't sure what Thompson meant by additional challenges, but something in his tone suggested that he was trying to prepare her for more than just the standard evaluation procedures. That suspicion proved to be justified when she overheard a conversation between two senior drill sergeants that she wasn't supposed to hear. She had stayed after evening training to work on cleaning her rifle, a task that had become almost meditative for her. The armory was supposed to be empty except for the duty sergeant, but, as she worked in one of the back rooms, she heard voices from the main office area. "I still think this is a mistake," one voice was saying. Sarah recognized it as belonging to Sergeant First Class Williams, the marksmanship instructor who had praised her shooting and recommended her for the base team. "It's not our decision to make," replied another voice that Sarah didn't immediately recognize. The order came down from higher up. Someone wants to see exactly what happens when Martinez is given a rifle with a defective firing pin during the marksmanship portion of the evaluation. Sarah's blood ran cold. She stopped cleaning her rifle and strained to hear the rest of the conversation. "She's one of the most promising marksmen I've seen in 15 years of training recruits," Williams continued, his voice tight with frustration. "This is going to destroy her confidence and probably ruin any chance she has for advanced training assignments." "That might be the point," the other voice replied. "There are people who think that recent changes in military policy have lowered standards inappropriately. They want to demonstrate that certain recruits can't perform when the pressure is really on, even if they show promise under normal circumstances. So they're going to sabotage her equipment and then judge her based on the results? That's not evaluation, that's entrapment. Keep your voice down, Williams. And remember that this conversation never happened. The rifle will be assigned to her randomly, just like all the others. If she can't adapt to equipment failure in a training environment, how can we expect her to perform in actual combat situations?" Sarah heard footsteps moving away from the office area, and she quickly resumed cleaning her rifle, her hands shaking slightly as she processed what she had just learned. Someone was planning to give her a deliberately sabotaged rifle during the most important test of her military career so far. They wanted her to fail publicly, in front of representatives from advanced training programs, as part of some larger agenda about military standards and policies. Her first instinct was to report what she had heard, but she quickly realized the problems with that approach. She had been eavesdropping on a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear, involving orders that came from higher authority levels than anyone she could reasonably approach. Even if she could prove what she had heard, challenging the evaluation process would almost certainly end her military career before it really began. Sarah spent the rest of the evening considering her options. She could try to avoid the sabotaged rifle somehow, though she wasn't sure how that would be possible given the random assignment process. She could prepare herself mentally for equipment failure and try to adapt in real time, though a defective firing pin would make accurate shooting virtually impossible. Or she could find some other way to demonstrate her abilities despite the sabotaged equipment. By the time lights out was called, Sarah had made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of trying to avoid the trap that had been set for her, she was going to walk right into it and find a way to succeed anyway. If someone wanted to test her ability to perform when everything was working against her, she would show them exactly what a farm girl from Kansas could do when her back was against the wall. The next morning brought an announcement that added another layer of complexity to the situation. The evaluation exercise would be filmed and used as part of a training video for future recruits, which meant that Sarah's success or failure would be preserved and potentially viewed by thousands of soldiers for years to come. "This is a great honor for your training company," announced Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, the base training commander who had come to address the recruits personally. "You represent the future of the United States Army, and your performance during this evaluation will set standards for the recruits who follow in your footsteps." Colonel Hayes was an imposing figure, a career officer with multiple combat deployments and a reputation for demanding excellence from everyone under her command. She had also been one of the first women to serve in combat roles after military policy changes, which made her presence at the evaluation particularly significant. "Some of you will discover capabilities you never knew you possessed," Hayes continued. "Others will learn important lessons about your limitations and areas for improvement. All of you will be challenged in ways that prepare you for the realities of military service." As Sarah listened to the colonel's words, she began to understand the larger context of what was happening. The evaluation wasn't just about individual recruits, it was part of an ongoing debate about military standards, diversity, and the capabilities of soldiers who didn't fit traditional molds. She was being set up to fail not because of anything she had done wrong, but because her success or failure would be used to support or challenge arguments about whether the military should make accommodations for smaller soldiers, female soldiers, or soldiers from non-traditional backgrounds. The realization was both infuriating and clarifying. Sarah had spent her entire life being underestimated because of her size, her gender, her rural background, and her family's financial circumstances. Now she was facing the ultimate version of that same dynamic, with her military future and the broader implications for other soldiers like her hanging in the balance. That afternoon, the recruits received their specific assignments for the evaluation exercise. Each soldier would rotate through different stations that tested various skills, with the marksmanship station being the culminating event that would take place in front of the visiting dignitaries and the cameras. Sarah's assignment sheet indicated that she would be firing at the advanced marksmanship course, which involved targets at distances up to 500 meters and required precision shooting under time pressure. It was exactly the kind of challenge that should have played to her strengths if she had been given properly functioning equipment. As the recruits prepared their gear for the next day's evaluation, Sarah made several subtle preparations of her own. She spent extra time studying the backup procedures for rifle malfunctions, reviewing the technical manuals that detailed how different types of equipment failure might manifest during firing. She also spent time talking to some of the more experienced soldiers around the base, asking casual questions about how to diagnose and work around various mechanical problems. She was careful not to reveal her specific concerns, but she gathered information about alternative shooting techniques that might be effective even with compromised equipment. Most importantly, Sarah spent time preparing herself mentally for what she knew was coming. She thought about every challenge she had overcome in her life, from keeping the family farm running after her father's death to succeeding in basic training despite being one of the smallest and least prepared recruits. She remembered her father's words about finding strength she never knew she had, and she thought about the promise she had made to discover how extraordinary she could really be. Tomorrow, she would find out whether that promise had been naive optimism or genuine possibility. The evening before the evaluation, David Chen approached Sarah as she was making final preparations to her equipment. "You seem different tonight," he observed. "More focused, but also more tense. Everything okay?" Sarah considered how much to tell him. David had been a good friend and ally during training, but she wasn't sure how he would react to learning about the planned sabotage. "I think tomorrow is going to be more challenging than any of us expect," she said finally. "I just want to be ready for anything." David nodded thoughtfully. "You know, I've been thinking about what makes some people succeed when others fail in situations like this. It's not always about natural talent or preparation. Sometimes it's about how you respond when things don't go according to plan." He paused and looked at Sarah seriously. "Whatever happens tomorrow, remember that you've already proven you belong here. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise, regardless of how the evaluation goes." Sarah felt a surge of gratitude for David's friendship and support. Even though he didn't know the specific challenge she was facing, his words helped strengthen her resolve for what was coming. That night, Sarah lay awake longer than usual, running through scenarios and mentally rehearsing how she would handle different types of equipment failure. She thought about every hunting trip with her father, every time she had to make a crucial shot when there was no second chance, every moment when her family's livelihood had depended on her ability to stay calm and accurate under pressure. She also thought about the broader implications of tomorrow's evaluation. Other young women who were considering military service would eventually see the training video that was being filmed. Soldiers who came from rural backgrounds or non-traditional circumstances would be influenced by what happened during her test. Sarah realized that she wasn't just fighting for her own future anymore. She was fighting to prove that excellence could come from unexpected places, that determination could overcome deliberate sabotage, and that the measure of a soldier wasn't found in their background or their appearance, but in their ability to accomplish the mission regardless of the obstacles they faced. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah felt a calm certainty settling over her. Tomorrow, someone was going to give her a rifle designed to ensure her failure, in front of cameras and evaluators who expected her to crumble under pressure. They were about to discover what happened when you tried to break someone who had been forged by years of overcoming impossible circumstances. They were about to learn that the quiet farm girl from Kansas had inherited more than just her father's shooting skills. She had inherited his unbreakable determination to succeed when failure was not an option. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test everything Sarah had learned about herself and everything she believed about what she was capable of achieving. In less than 12 hours, she would face the moment that would define not just her military career, but her understanding of who she really was when everything was on the line. The morning of the evaluation dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of perfect visibility that marksmen dream of. Sarah woke before her alarm, as she had every day for the past week, but this time her early waking came from anticipation rather than anxiety. She had made peace with what was coming, and now she was ready to face it head-on. The recruits assembled at 0500 hours for a final equipment inspection and briefing. The atmosphere was tense with nervous energy as 30 young soldiers prepared for the most important test of their military careers so far. Some paced nervously, others sat in quiet contemplation, and a few tried to maintain casual conversation to mask their anxiety. Sarah moved through her preparations with methodical calm, checking and double-checking her uniform, her gear, and her mental state. She had spent years preparing for high-pressure situations, moments when a missed shot meant a hungry family or a predator attacking their livestock. This was just a larger version of the same challenge. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes addressed the recruits one final time before they moved to the evaluation stations. Behind her stood a group of officers and senior non-commissioned officers who would be observing and scoring their performance. Sarah recognized several faces, including Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who had originally counseled her toward infantry training, and Sergeant First Class Williams, whose expression was carefully neutral despite what Sarah knew he was thinking about the day's planned events. Today, you will demonstrate not just what you have learned during basic training, but who you are as future soldiers, Hayes announced. The standards you will be held to are the same standards that soldiers in combat units must meet every day. There will be no accommodations for nerves, no second chances for poor performance, and no excuses for failure. She paused and let her eyes sweep across the group of recruits. However, there will also be recognition for exceptional performance, opportunities for those who exceed expectations, and advancement for soldiers who prove they are ready for greater challenges. The evaluation began with physical fitness testing, followed by tactical exercises that required teamwork and problem-solving under stress. Sarah performed well in both areas, though she noticed that several of the observing officers paid particular attention to her performance. Some seemed supportive, others appeared skeptical, and a few watched her with the kind of detached interest that suggested they were evaluating her for purposes beyond the immediate training exercise. The morning progressed through various stations that tested different aspects of military knowledge and capability. Sarah successfully completed a land navigation course, demonstrated proper procedures for handling various types of military equipment, and participated in a simulated combat scenario that required quick thinking and clear communication. By noon, only 2 stations remained: leadership evaluation and marksmanship. The leadership station involved directing a small team of fellow recruits through a complex tactical problem, while the marksmanship station was the culminating individual challenge that everyone knew would carry the most weight in final scoring. Sarah was assigned to complete the leadership station first, which gave her additional time to observe the marksmanship testing before her own turn. She watched as other recruits approached the firing line with various degrees of confidence, some performing well while others struggled with the pressure of being evaluated by senior officers and filmed for posterity. During the leadership exercise, Sarah found herself directing David Chen and 3 other recruits through a scenario that involved securing a simulated enemy position while protecting simulated civilian casualties. The exercise required not just tactical knowledge but the ability to make quick decisions, communicate clearly under stress, and adapt when initial plans proved inadequate. Sarah discovered that her farming background had prepared her for this challenge in unexpected ways. Years of coordinating farm work with hired hands, managing complex schedules during planting and harvest seasons, and solving problems with limited resources had taught her how to organize teams and delegate responsibilities effectively. When the scenario required an immediate change of tactics due to new information, Sarah quickly redistributed assignments and adjusted their approach without losing momentum. When one of her team members became confused about his role, she provided clear, specific guidance that got him back on track without making him feel criticized or embarrassed. The exercise concluded successfully, with all objectives met within the required time frame. As Sarah led her team off the training area, she caught a glimpse of the evaluating officers making notes on their scoring sheets. Whatever they wrote, their expressions suggested that her performance had exceeded their expectations. But Sarah's attention was already shifting to the marksmanship station, where she could see the range officers preparing for the afternoon session. The rifles had been laid out in a long row, each one tagged with a number that corresponded to the firing order. Sarah's would be rifle number 7, though she had no way of knowing which specific weapon that would be until she was called to the line. The marksmanship evaluation was scheduled to begin at 1,400 hours, with each recruit given 30 minutes to complete a course of fire that included targets at 50, 100, 200, 300, and 500 meters. The scoring was precise and unforgiving. Each shot was worth specific points based on accuracy, with bonus points awarded for exceptional precision and time penalties assessed for shots fired after the allocated time limits. As 1,400 hours approached, Sarah joined the other remaining recruits in the staging area adjacent to the firing range. The atmosphere was quiet and focused, with everyone making final mental preparations for the challenge ahead. Some recruits whispered brief prayers, others went through breathing exercises, and a few simply sat in meditation-like silence. Sarah used the time to review everything she knew about rifle malfunctions and alternative shooting techniques. She had identified several potential approaches that might allow her to achieve acceptable accuracy even with a defective firing pin, though all of them would require precise timing and near-perfect execution under pressure. When her name was called, Sarah approached the equipment table where Sergeant Martinez, no relation, despite the shared name, was assigning rifles according to the predetermined random order. Sergeant Martinez handed her rifle number 7 without any change in expression, though Sarah thought she detected a flicker of something, sympathy, perhaps, or concern, in his eyes. The rifle looked identical to all the others, with no external signs of the internal defect that Sarah knew it carried. She accepted it with steady hands and moved to the preparation area where she had 5 minutes to inspect her equipment and make final adjustments to her shooting gear. Sarah went through the standard inspection routine, checking the rifle's action, verifying the sight alignment, and ensuring that all components appeared to be functioning normally. Everything looked perfect, exactly as it was supposed to for a rifle with a deliberately hidden defect that would only manifest when she attempted to fire. As she completed her inspection, Sarah became aware that an unusual number of people were gathering around the observation area. In addition to the standard evaluating officers, she could see Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, several other senior officers she didn't recognize, and the video crew that was documenting the evaluation for future training purposes. Word had apparently spread about the farm girl from Kansas who had been posting exceptional shooting scores during training. Some of the observers were probably hoping to witness another impressive performance, while others might have different expectations for how the afternoon would unfold. Sarah was called to the firing line at precisely 1430 hours. She approached the designated firing position with her rifle and the ammunition that had been provided, 40 rounds of standard military ball ammunition, slightly more than the 35 shots she would actually need for the course of fire. The range safety officer provided final instructions and verified that Sarah understood the course requirements. She would begin with 5 shots at 50 meters, then progress through increasingly distant targets, with specific time limits for each distance and strict accuracy requirements that would determine her final score. "Are you ready, Private Martinez?" the range safety officer asked. "Yes, Sergeant," Sarah replied, her voice steady and confident despite the racing of her heart. "You may load and commence firing when ready." Sarah loaded her first round and settled into her shooting position. Around her, the observation area fell silent as dozens of eyes focused on the small soldier who was about to attempt one of the most challenging marksmanship courses in military training. She aimed carefully at the 50-meter target, controlled her breathing, and squeezed the trigger with the smooth, steady pressure that her father had taught her years earlier. Click! The firing pin struck the cartridge, but nothing happened. No explosion, no recoil, no bullet heading downrange toward the target. Just the hollow sound of a mechanical action that had failed to accomplish its purpose. Sarah felt a moment of crushing disappointment, followed immediately by a surge of anger at the unfairness of the situation. Then, almost instantly, those emotions were replaced by the cold determination that had carried her through every crisis of her life. She had known this was coming, and she was ready. Without hesitation, Sarah executed immediate action procedures for a rifle malfunction, pulling the charging handle to eject the failed round and chamber a new cartridge. She aimed again and squeezed the trigger. Click! Another failure. The defective firing pin was doing exactly what it had been designed to do, making it impossible for her to fire the rifle normally. Sarah could hear murmurs from the observation area, and she knew that everyone was waiting to see how she would respond. Some probably expected her to call for assistance or request a replacement rifle. Others might have anticipated that she would become flustered and lose her composure under the pressure. Instead, Sarah did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She stood up from her shooting position, turned to face the range safety officer, and spoke in a clear voice that carried across the range. "Sergeant, I'm experiencing repeated rifle malfunctions that appear to be caused by a defective firing pin. Request permission to continue the evaluation using alternative procedures." The range safety officer looked confused. "Alternative procedures?" "Private, if your rifle is malfunctioning, the standard protocol is to, with respect, Sergeant," Sarah interrupted politely but firmly, "I believe I can complete this evaluation successfully despite the equipment problem. I request permission to demonstrate." A hush fell over the observation area. This was not a situation that any of the evaluators had anticipated, and there was no standard protocol for a recruit who wanted to continue shooting with a rifle that couldn't fire. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes stepped forward from the observation area. "Private Martinez, what exactly are you proposing?" Sarah turned to face the colonel, her mind racing as she formulated a plan that had never been fully tested but might represent her only chance for success. "Ma'am, I propose to complete the marksmanship evaluation by demonstrating perfect shooting form, technique, and target engagement procedures, with accuracy verified through alternative means." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Alternative means?" "Yes, ma'am. I can demonstrate precise target acquisition and engagement at all required distances. The only difference will be in how the results are measured." There was a long moment of silence as Hayes considered this unprecedented request. Sarah could see the colonel weighing different factors: the irregularity of the situation, the presence of the cameras, the implications for future training protocols. Finally, Hayes nodded. "Very well, Private Martinez. You have permission to proceed. Show us what you're proposing." Sarah returned to her shooting position, her mind now operating with the crystalline clarity that came when everything was on the line. She had one chance to prove that her abilities transcended the limitations of sabotaged equipment, and she was going to make it count. What happened next would be talked about at Fort Carson for years to come, and would eventually be studied at military training institutions around the world as an example of how true excellence could overcome any obstacle, even deliberate sabotage designed to ensure failure. Sarah returned to her shooting position with a calmness that surprised even her. The weight of dozens of staring eyes, the rolling cameras, and the career-defining nature of the next few minutes should have been overwhelming. Instead, she felt the same focused clarity that had always come over her during the most critical moments of her life. She had a plan, but it was unlike anything that had ever been attempted in military marksmanship evaluation. It would require perfect execution, absolute confidence, and a demonstration of skills that went far beyond anything taught in basic training manuals. "Sergeant," she called to the range safety officer, "I'll need an observer position downrange to verify target engagement." The range safety officer looked to Lieutenant Colonel Hayes for guidance. Hayes was clearly intrigued by whatever Sarah had in mind, and she nodded permission for the request. "I'll observe personally," announced Sergeant First Class Williams, the marksmanship instructor who had originally recommended Sarah for the base shooting team. Williams understood firearms and marksmanship better than almost anyone on the base, and his presence as an observer would lend credibility to whatever Sarah was planning to demonstrate. Williams walked downrange to the 50-meter target line while Sarah prepared for her first demonstration. She settled into her shooting position, aimed carefully at the center of the target, and executed what appeared to be a normal shot sequence: proper breathing, steady aim, smooth trigger squeeze. Click! The rifle failed to fire, exactly as expected. But, instead of showing frustration or disappointment, Sarah immediately called out, "Target engaged, center mass, estimated point of impact 1 inch high and 2 inches right of center." Williams examined the target carefully, then looked back toward the firing line with obvious surprise. "Confirmed," he called back. Based on the sight picture and aiming point demonstrated, that shot would have struck exactly where Private Martinez indicated. Murmurs of confusion and interest rippled through the observation area. What Sarah was demonstrating was something that only the most experienced marksman could do, predicting with precision where a shot would impact based purely on sight alignment and aiming technique, without actually firing the rifle. Sarah continued with her second shot at the 50-meter target. Again, she went through the complete firing sequence, called out her predicted impact point, and received confirmation from Williams that her assessment was accurate. She completed all 5 shots at 50 meters with the same remarkable precision, predicting impact points that varied by only inches from what would have been perfect center hits. As she prepared to move to the 100-meter targets, Sarah could see that the crowd of observers had grown significantly. Word was spreading throughout the base that something unprecedented was happening at the evaluation range, and off-duty soldiers were gathering to witness what would later be described as one of the most extraordinary demonstrations of marksmanship skill in military training history. The 100-meter targets presented a greater challenge, requiring more precise calculations and adjustments for distance and wind conditions. Sarah took extra time to analyze the environmental factors, noting the direction and speed of the wind and the angle of the afternoon sun that might affect her sight picture. She settled into position for her first shot at 100 meters, went through her firing sequence, and called out, "Target engaged, estimated impact point dead center." Williams confirmed the accuracy of her prediction, and Sarah could hear excitement beginning to build in the voices of the observers. What she was doing was becoming clear: she was demonstrating that her marksmanship skills were so advanced that she could achieve perfect accuracy without actually firing a shot. But the real test was still coming. The 200-meter, 300-meter, and 500-meter targets would require calculations and adjustments that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible in precision shooting, even with properly functioning equipment. Sarah moved through the 100-meter sequence with flawless accuracy, each predicted impact point confirmed by Williams as being exactly where a fired shot would have struck. By the time she finished the 100-meter targets, the observation area had grown to include nearly 50 people, including several base commanders who had come to see what was causing such a commotion. The 200-meter targets marked a significant escalation in difficulty. At this distance, small errors in technique or calculation would be magnified into significant misses, and the effects of wind and other environmental factors became much more critical. Sarah spent several minutes analyzing conditions and making mental calculations before settling into her shooting position. The crowd had grown quiet, sensing that they were witnessing something truly exceptional. "First shot, 200 meters, Sarah announced. Estimating impact point 1 ring high, dead center horizontally." She executed her firing sequence with the same precision she had demonstrated at shorter ranges, but now the complexity of her calculations was becoming apparent to the experienced marksman in the audience. Williams confirmed her prediction, and Sarah could hear audible gasps from some of the observers. What she was doing required not just exceptional shooting fundamentals, but also advanced knowledge of ballistics, environmental factors, and the precise characteristics of the rifle and ammunition she was using. She completed all 5 shots at 200 meters with the same remarkable accuracy, then moved on to the 300-meter targets that represented the most challenging portion of standard military marksmanship evaluation. At 300 meters, the margin for error became microscopic. Sarah would need to account for bullet drop, wind drift, the effects of temperature and humidity on ballistic performance, and dozens of other variables that could affect shot placement. She took nearly 5 minutes to analyze conditions and make her calculations before settling into position for her first shot. The crowd had grown to over 100 people, and Sarah could see that Lieutenant Colonel Hayes was speaking quietly with other senior officers, clearly discussing the implications of what they were witnessing. "First shot, 300 meters, Sarah announced. Estimating impact point 2 inches low, 1 inch left of center, accounting for crosswind from the northeast at approximately 8 miles per hour." Her level of detail surprised even Williams, who had to take several moments to verify that her environmental assessment matched his own observations before confirming her predicted impact point. Sarah completed the 300-meter sequence flawlessly, demonstrating a level of marksmanship knowledge and skill that exceeded what was taught even in advanced military schools. But the ultimate test was still ahead, the 500-meter targets that only the most elite marksmen could engage accurately under normal circumstances. At 500 meters, Sarah would be attempting something that many experienced soldiers considered impossible, predicting shot placement with precision that competed with actual fired rounds, at a distance where even small calculation errors would result in complete misses. The crowd had grown silent as Sarah prepared for this final demonstration. She spent nearly 10 minutes analyzing wind patterns, calculating bullet trajectories, and accounting for every variable that could affect shot placement at extreme range. When she finally settled into her shooting position, Sarah felt the same sense of perfect focus that had come over her during the most important hunts of her childhood, moments when her family's dinner depended on a single shot at a moving target in challenging conditions. "First shot, 500 meters, she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the now silent range. Estimating impact point 4 inches low, 3 inches right of center, accounting for crosswind, bullet drop, and atmospheric density at current temperature and humidity levels." She executed her firing sequence with movements so smooth and precise that they seemed almost ceremonial. Williams took several minutes to verify her calculations and environmental assessments before confirming that her predicted impact point was exactly correct. Sarah completed all 5 shots at 500 meters with the same extraordinary precision, finishing the most challenging marksmanship evaluation in military training without firing a single round, yet demonstrating accuracy that would have earned her a perfect score with any functioning rifle. As she stood up from her final shooting position, the observation area erupted in spontaneous applause. What Sarah had just accomplished was unprecedented in military training history. She had turned equipment failure into an opportunity to demonstrate skills that transcended normal evaluation methods. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes approached the firing line personally, her expression a mixture of amazement and respect. "Private Martinez," Hayes said, "in 25 years of military service, I have never witnessed anything comparable to what you just demonstrated. Would you mind explaining how you developed this level of expertise?" Sarah felt her cheeks flush as she realized that the attention of the entire crowd was focused on her. Ma'am, my father taught me that marksmanship isn't just about pulling a trigger. He said that a true marksman should understand every factor that affects shot placement and be able to predict results before firing. He made me practice dry shooting 4 months before he let me fire live rounds, until I could consistently predict where shots would land. Hayes nodded thoughtfully. And, you applied that childhood training to military weapons and evaluation standards? Yes, ma'am. I've been studying ballistics tables and military marksmanship manuals since basic training began. I wanted to understand not just how to shoot, but why shots go where they go under different conditions. Sergeant First Class Williams stepped forward from the target line. Colonel Hayes, I need to point out that what Private Martinez just demonstrated required calculations and environmental assessments that are typically taught only in advanced sniper schools. She basically conducted a graduate-level ballistics exercise using equipment that was designed to make her fail. Hayes raised an eyebrow. Designed to make her fail? Williams hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing whether to reveal what he knew about the sabotaged rifle. Finally, he made his decision. Ma'am, the firing pin in that rifle was deliberately damaged to prevent normal function. This evaluation was intended to test how Private Martinez would respond to equipment failure under pressure. A murmur of shock ran through the crowd as the implications of Williams' statement became clear. Sarah had not only overcome a mechanical problem, she had succeeded despite deliberate sabotage designed to ensure her failure. Hayes turned back to Sarah with an expression that had shifted from respect to something approaching awe. Private Martinez, did you know about the sabotaged equipment? Sarah considered her answer carefully. I suspected that my rifle might malfunction, ma'am. But I prepared for that possibility and developed alternative methods to demonstrate my marksmanship abilities. And, you chose to proceed with the evaluation anyway, knowing you would be at a significant disadvantage? Yes, ma'am. I wanted to prove that my skills are not dependent on having perfect equipment or ideal circumstances. Hayes was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing the full implications of what had just occurred. When she spoke again, her voice carried a note of finality that suggested important decisions were being made. Private Martinez, the original purpose of this evaluation was to identify recruits with exceptional potential for advanced training opportunities. You have just demonstrated capabilities that exceed the requirements for every program we were prepared to offer. She paused and looked at the crowd of observers, which now included several officers that Sarah recognized as being from specialized units beyond Fort Carson. I am immediately recommending you for evaluation by Special Operations Command, Hayes continued. Additionally, I am recommending that your demonstration today be studied as a new training methodology for advanced marksmanship instruction. Sarah felt her knees go weak as the magnitude of what Hayes was saying hit her. Special Operations Command oversaw the most elite units in the military, Delta Force, Army Rangers, Special Forces, and other organizations that recruited only the most exceptional soldiers. But Hayes wasn't finished. More importantly, Private Martinez, you have just proven something that some people doubted was possible. You have shown that excellence can come from unexpected places, that determination can overcome deliberate obstacles, and that true skill transcends the limitations of equipment or circumstances. Hayes turned to address the crowd of observers. What we witnessed here today will be studied for years to come, not just as an example of exceptional marksmanship, but as a demonstration of what happens when someone refuses to accept failure as an option. As the crowd began to disperse and the evaluation officially concluded, Sarah found herself surrounded by officers and senior enlisted soldiers who wanted to congratulate her and learn more about her background and training methods. Several mentioned specific advanced schools and programs that she should consider applying for, while others asked detailed questions about her ballistics calculations and environmental assessment techniques. But the conversation that meant the most to Sarah came from David Chen, who had watched the entire demonstration with obvious pride and amazement. That was incredible, he said as the crowd thinned out. I knew you were good, but what you just did was beyond anything I've ever seen. How are you feeling about all this? Sarah looked around at the range where she had just transformed a deliberate act of sabotage into the most significant triumph of her life. In the distance, she could see the Rocky Mountains where her journey had begun just a few weeks earlier, when she had been a scared farm girl who wasn't sure she belonged in the military. I feel like I finally understand what my father meant when he said I had gifts that this world needed to see, she replied. And I feel like this is just the beginning of finding out what I'm really capable of. 6 months later, Sarah Martinez graduated from the Army's elite sniper school with the highest scores in the program's history. The training video of her evaluation demonstration had become legendary throughout the military, used as an example of how true excellence could overcome any obstacle. But, more than that, her story had inspired hundreds of other young people from similar backgrounds to pursue military careers, knowing that dedication and skill could overcome any disadvantage or preconceived notion about what a soldier should look like. Sarah had kept the promise she made to her father, discovering exactly how extraordinary she could be when given the chance to prove it. The farm girl from Kansas had become a legend, and, in doing so, had shown the world that sometimes the greatest victories come from the most broken tools, and the strongest people are forged in the fires of impossible circumstances. The base scoreboard would forever show her name at the top of the marksmanship records, but Sarah knew that the real victory was not in the scores or the recognition. The real victory was in proving that she belonged exactly where she was, and that no one would ever again be able to say that someone like her couldn't achieve something remarkable when given the opportunity to show what she was made of.